Okay, so a while back, I told you guys that we were going to cover some more noir books on the channel. And I meant that. Now, technically, we only covered one so far, and that was Punisher Noir. But when it comes to Marvel Noir in the late 2000s, going into the 2010s, there were a lot of noir books. Iron Man, Daredevil, X-Men had like two of them. Weapon X, Spider-Man had three of them. But today's video is going to be about Luke Cage Noir. And honestly, I feel like this one is just like the Punisher Noir book, where it was a good book, but I feel like a lot of people may have not read it or it's been completely forgotten about. Because honestly, I don't see a lot of people talking about this book on YouTube. I see, Spider Man, X Men, of course, even Daredevil, even Iron Man. But like Punisher Noir, this one has not been fully talked about yet. So let's go ahead and dive into Luke Cage Noir. Now, something you have to remember is that for the noir books, they all take place in the 1930s. That is really important. And the reason why, because as we dive into the opening pages of the storyline, we do pick up with a woman being killed off in the back alley of some building. Now, she is Caucasian, and yes, the idea of her being Caucasian is very important for today's storyline, but she's being killed off by somebody, and we have no idea who had just killed her off. But of course, she did die in some back alley, but she was found by a police officer. But you did have the story quickly transition over to Luke Cage, who's now being able to leave prison after being there for 10 years. Now, we're not told why in the world he was in prison for, but we do know one thing. Today's the day he's able to go back home. And so we see him head back over to Harlem. Now, while doing that and going through different parts of his old town, we see people kind of look at Luke Cage as some kind of legend. That he did something in Harlem before he was arrested and locked away for 10 years. And the question is right now, what did he do to have all of these people look at him as some kind of hero? Now, you do have Luke Cage go over to a nearby barber shop, really the one he always went to before he got locked up, because now the man needs a clean cut. And so, after getting his hair cut, you do have the barber inform Luke Cage about a character known as Stryker. Now, for Stryker, he is Luke Cage's childhood friend in this reality, but apparently, Stryker has now become big time to the point where his gang kind of rules over different parts of Harlem in different types of ways. But either way, for Luke Cage, he wants to find his good old friend. Now, while you have Luke Cage getting his haircut, you have people wondering how in the world did he get out of prison early? Now, you do have one guy kind of hint at the idea that Luke Cage was part of some kind of experiment where apparently he was a guinea pig, but the experiment did not kill him off. And so, because of that, he was now able to leave prison early. Now, you have Luke Cage say, hey, listen, you should not believe everything you hear. But either way, once you have Luke get his haircut, he leaves to go find his good old childhood friend, Stryker. And so you have Luke go over to a nearby meat shop. Now, of course, one of those old classic moves where you got a meat shop, but really in the back of the shop where the gang hangs out at. And so you have Luke go into the back, knock on the door. Of course, there's a password. The guy's all like, hey, I don't know who you are. I can't let you in. You have Luke Cage say, nah, bro, you're going to let me in. And so you have Luke being able to walk into the back room. Now, of course, you do have a bunch of guys point their guns at Luke, but luckily for Luke Cage, Stryker walks out. Now, for Stryker, he's really happy because his childhood friend has now officially come back home to Harlem. And so now the two of them can have a nice conversation. Now, at first, the conversation is really more about Stryker telling Luke Cage how he was able to build up his gang in Harlem, how he became a very powerful force in Gotham, which is honestly a great thing for him. But you did have Luke Cage wondering what happened to Josephine. Now, Josephine was the woman that Luke Cage loved very much. But the thing is, you have Stryker tell Luke Cage that she died, that apparently there was a fire in her building. Now, she was able to get out of the building, but unfortunately, she had died days later thanks to her injuries. Now, you do have Stryker hand Luke Cage over this small necklace, this heart shaped necklace. Now, this necklace is going to be very important at the end of this chapter, going into the second chapter. But while you have the two guys talking to one another, but while the conversation was going on, you did have some random guy who works for Stryker pull out a gun on Luke Cage. Now, this guy is very upset at Luke Cage because apparently in the past, this guy used to beat up women. And so you had Luke Cage beat him up for basically doing that, but also breaking the jaw of a random woman. And so because the guy got beat up by Luke Cage, he wants revenge against Luke Cage. Now, for Luke Cage, he's kind of playing off this idea that he is bulletproof. And matter of fact, if the guy does shoot him and does not kill him, Luke Cage is going to kill him. And the guy got so scared that you have him just run away. He's all like, hey, you know what? If you are bulletproof, that means this gun is basically pointless and I just messed up. So he dipped out in a heartbeat. But right after you have Luke Cage kind of finish up with all that mess inside the base of Stryker, you have Luke Cage leave. Now, once he does leave, he's then confronted by a guy known as Randall Bantikoff. Now, for Randall, he wants to hire Luke Cage because remember, at the very beginning of the storyline, there was a Caucasian woman who was killed off in the back alley. And so for Randall, that was his wife. He said, listen, she died here in Harlem. And unfortunately, because she is Caucasian, they're not really trying their best to figure out who had killed her off. And so that's where you come in, Luke Cage. I want you to help me figure out who had killed off my wife. Now, he thought that because who Luke Cage is, he can give Luke Cage some money or some women, but you have Luke Cage say no. If you want me to help you figure out what in the world happened to your wife, I need you to clean my record. I want a clean record. Now, for Randall, that's a huge thing to ask for, but at the same time, he wants this done. And so he agrees to help out Luke Cage as long as Luke helps him out. And so you have Luke head over to the morgue. Now, on his way over there, you have Luke tell us two things. The first is that he believes that Stryker is lying about something, and most likely about Josephine or what happened to her. But on top of that, he's also wondering who in the world told Randall to look up Luke Cage to have Luke help him figure out what happened to his wife? Now, for Luke, once he does arrive at the morgue and he looks at the dead body, he realizes that she's already bloating. And so for Luke, that means that she has been dead longer than what people believe she has been. But either way, is Luke saying, okay, you know what? I am now looking at two dead bodies or two dead women. Well, technically one, is him believing that Josephine could possibly still be alive. And honestly, you have Luke Cage believe that she could be alive because the man then goes over to her grave and he begins to dig up the coffin. Now, once you have Luke Cage being able to dig up the coffin, two things happen. The first is that he realized that her body is not there. But two, he's also now being confronted by a bunch of guys with guns pointing at him and their leader. And their leader is, well, Tombstone. So as we dive into the second chapter, it's really more of us now picking up with Luke Cage in the grave of his supposed dead wife, but now being surrounded by the people who work for Tombstone. Now, you have Tombstone go ahead and send some dogs down there to, chew up on Luke Cage, but then we get a small flashback. Now, with this flashback, we're not really able to get the full picture of what exactly went down, but apparently you had Luke Cage beat down on a cop who was touching on a woman. Now, we can kind of go ahead and say that most likely it was Josephine, but either way, apparently she was dancing for this guy at some kind of club, and the guy thought he had the freedom to touch her however he wanted to, but also kind of talk down to Luke Cage. And so for Luke, that was not okay at all. And so you had Luke go out of his way to beat down on the guy to only find out at the end that the guy he was beating down on was a cop. But now we have to jump back over to the present day. Now, when we do, we pick up with Luke Cage trying his best to get rid of the dogs that were sent after him by Tombstone. Now, while trying to protect himself, he finds the Lord Prayer in the coffin that was supposed to be for his wife. Now, here's the thing, her entire family is gone. And so he's kind of wondering who in the world put the Lord Prayer inside an empty coffin that was supposed to be for Josephine. Either way, you have Luke Cage being able to get rid of the dogs. But after doing that, you have Tombstone say, listen, if I wanted you dead, I would have killed you here and now. But here's the thing, I'm going to give you one night only to get the heck out of this city. Do you understand? Now, for Luke Cage, he has no choice but to go ahead and say yes and try his best to get the heck out of town. Now, you already know Luke Cage is not going to leave that easily. Matter of fact, he even says when it comes to Tombstone, he's going to be very disappointed when he finds out that I'm not trying to leave Harlem at all. I'm going to stay here another night or two. But either way, you do have Luke Cage go ahead and meet back up with Randall once again. Now, when it comes to Randall, it's really more of him trying to explain how much he loved Daisy so much. Daisy was the woman who died at the very beginning of this storyline. It's him saying, like, you don't understand what she did for me. And so that's why I'm trying my hardest to figure out what happened to my wife. Now, for Randall, he leaves. But for Luke Cage, it's really more of like, I want to believe him, but something is not right here. Because to Luke Cage, he's saying that usually for Caucasian people in the 1930s, they don't come to Harlem unless for some, women or some good food. And that's really it. So why in the world would he and her both come to Harlem? There's something going on here that he's not being able to figure out. And so he begins to follow Randall. So you have Luke Cage being able to follow Randall over to another building. Now, when he does, it's him finding out that Randall is meeting up with another woman, except she's black. Now, Luke Cage said earlier that Caucasian people only came to Harlem when they were looking for some, fun time with a woman, or if you were a lady, fun time with a man. But either way, that is going to be very important for the ending of this storyline. Now, for Luke Cage, his goal is to follow this young woman. Now, when he does, it does take him all the way over to what seems to be her home. Except when he goes inside with her, trying to confront her, he's then being held at gunpoint by somebody who lives there. Now, for Luke Cage, he believes like, okay, you know what? This guy who lives here is most likely her husband. Let me go ahead and tell him that his lady is right now cheating on him with some guy known as Randall. But before you have Luke Cage being able to explain everything over to this guy, he gets knocked out from behind. And once you have Luke Cage wake back up, he wakes up in an apartment where, one, there's a bunch of blood, but two, he finds this random lease that has his name on it. And so, of course, somebody is trying to set him up to basically say that he is a killer. Question is right now, who did he kill supposedly? Now, for Luke Cage, he realized the police had arrived. So his main goal is to get the heck out of there. Except you have Luke Cage run up to the rooftop, where unfortunately he is then surrounded by Tombstone, a few guys who work for Tombstone, but also Officer Ratchman. Now, for Albert Ratchman, he was the cop that Luke Cage beat up 10 years ago for touching Josephine. And so right now, they're trying to say like, hey, you know what? You're the one who killed off Daisy. Now remember, it's Luke Cage trying to figure out who killed off Daisy, and really, Luke Cage got out after Daisy was already killed off. But right now, they're trying to set things up in a way where it's all like, no, Luke Cage was the one who had killed off Daisy, so let's go ahead and arrest him and lock him up once again for being a killer this time. Now, of course, you do have Luke Cage finding a way out of this situation, where he was able to tick off Tombstone by calling him different names and talking about his mother. And so you had Tombstone wanting to fight against Luke Cage. Luke was able to grab the gun that Tombstone had, shoot a water tower to bring the whole thing down to allow Luke Cage to get away. but just barely. Now, after you have Luke being able to get away, his next goal is to find the one person he cared for the most, and that would be Josephine. He still believes that she is alive. And so he goes over to a nearby church, a church that most likely that she always went to. But either way, you have Luke go inside and he finds this supposed nun. Now, for Luke, he knows right off the bat that it is Josephine. And honestly, he was right. He found his supposed dead woman. Now, you would think, like, okay, as we go in the third chapter, it'll be a great reunion for these two characters. He found the woman he loved from 10 years ago still alive. Now, her face has been cut up, but she said, hey, listen, you gotta go. Like, do as you're told and just leave. And so, just like that, she walks away. You're like, dang, Luke, you found her, but she can't be with you. Now you have Luke Cage go back to what seemed to be the motel he's kind of staying in for the night, but when you have Luke Cage get back there, he's confronted by Stryker. Now for Stryker, it's him still trying to be that friend for Luke Cage, even though Luke knows there's something going on, but it's also Stryker saying like, you gotta leave Harlem, like get out of town. Matter of fact, I have a farm down in Maryland. If you were able to work there for me for a short period of time, I will give you half ownership of the land out there, but you gotta go. Now, this leads into another flashback, which kind of explains the whole idea of why Luke Cage is a legend around these parts of Harlem. Because we learn here that Luke Cage went up against Tombstone, right? But you had Tombstone shoot Luke Cage. And the thing was, Luke Cage got right back up. And when he did that, everyone saw him get back up. And that was the moment where you had people believe that Luke Cage was this very indestructible man. He could not be hurt at all. He got up so easily and stood up to Tombstone back then. Now, it's also Stryker in the present day saying, like, because of that moment right there, you are a hero to these people, and I want to go ahead and try to protect you from anybody who's trying to kill you and get you the heck out of town. Now, for Luke Cage, he already knows that Stryker is lying about everything. He don't know why, but he knows he can't trust Stryker at the moment. And so you have Stryker say, hey, listen, go ahead and change. As soon as you change, we can leave here and I'll take you down to Maryland myself. Now, Luke Cage knows if he goes with Stryker, then most likely he is going to die. And so you have Luke Cage go into the bathroom, set up a trap where it will make the entire floor explode. But you have Luke Cage sneak out of the window. They hear the window breaking. They go inside the window to find Luke gone, and bam, they fall for his trap. The entire floor explodes. Stryker does survive, but of course, he's now badly burned. But for Luke Cage, he knows he has to figure out what in the world is going on here. So you have Luke Cage go ahead and follow that same woman from earlier that he tried to follow, but unfortunately he got knocked out earlier. And so once he's able to get close to her, he pushes her onto some train tracks. And there's a train coming, but she needs his help to get out of the way. But he says, no, you're going to tell me what in the world is going on here. And so she tells Luke Cage everything. And so she tells Luke Cage it all began when you have beat down on that cop 10 years ago, Ratchman. Now here's the thing. Tombstone has stepped in to stop Luke Cage from beating down on that cop. Now everyone knew that cop was dirty, and so was Tombstone. But either way, Tombstone was trying to protect Ratchman, and that is why he shot Luke Cage. But as we all know, Luke Cage got right back up. When Luke did that, he became a hero in the city. Now, with all that being said, thanks to Tombstone kind of stepping in to help out Ratchman, well, once Luke got arrested, they made Tombstone a cop. Now, things get even crazier because, again, they were all corrupted. You had Ratchman. You had also Tombstone and Stryker begin to work together as a way to take over different kinds of operations going on in Harlem. Prostitution, drugs, and the list goes on. But then when it came to Ratchman, he wanted more of Josephine, but she did not want anything from him at all. And so he got very upset and he wanted her gone. And so for Stryker, his part was to make sure that she had disappeared, which technically she did disappear, but for Ratchman, it was more of like, no, we should have killed her off instead. Now, for Luke, it's all coming together now because now he realized that he'll be the key to kind of destroy everything they have built in Harlem. Now, she also tells Luke there is a fourth person, a black person who had helped the three guys get big in Harlem and being able to build all these different operations in Harlem. And really, we kind of get confirmation that everything she said was true because now you have Stryker, Tombstone, and also Ratchman meeting up in the hospital, and they all agree that Luke Cage must be killed off. But then a fourth person walks into the room who kind of agrees that Luke got to go, but at the same time, he's so very upset in how they weren't able to get rid of Luke Cage. But for Luke Cage, he's trying to figure out who in the world could be this fourth person because you have to have a lot of money to be able to make moves like that in Harlem. Now, he does see a photo of Daisy once again. And when he does, he's kind of like, the photo looks very sloppy, like it was taken by a sloppy person. And so for Luke, he knows only one person in Harlem who's that sloppy and fast when it comes to taking photos. And so you have Luke being able to find that photographer. Now, the guy tells him right off the bat, like, yeah, I know them. That's Mr. and Mrs. Benikoff. They were regulars here at the show. Now, for Luke, he's wondering why in the world would they come here to this part of Harlem? Like, yes, you did have a lot of white people come as part of Harlem, but the question is right now, why would these two be regulars here? Now, you also have the guy say, yeah, I was paid by Officer Ratchman to take photos of them. Now, for Luke, he's wondering, why in the world would Ratchman want photos of those people? Now, again, Luke is a hero in Harlem. So the guy said, hey, listen, you are a hero to me. I was there 10 years ago when you stood up to Ratchman and Tombstone. Can I get a photo? And Luke says yes and leaves. Now, with Luke being known as the hero of Harlem, he's able to scare a lot of people. So he goes back over to the base that belonged to Stryker. Stryker's not there. He's still in the hospital. And so you have Luke going there to find information, but he doesn't. Instead, he finds a bunch of money. And you didn't have Luke go out of his way to burn down the entire building that was owned by Stryker. This is Luke saying, like, this is now war. You try to come after me, and now I'm coming after you. But then we get another flashback. And with this flashback, we begin to learn that, yeah, when it comes to Luke Cage, the dude does not have any powers at all. You see, what happened was when he got shot by Tombstone, the only reason why he was able to get right back up because he had his metal flask in his coat pocket, right over his chest, in the perfect spot to take those two bullets. And so for everybody in Harlem, they believe like, yeah, Luke Cage is a legendary hero of our city. There's no way that anybody can stop him. But in reality, someone can because he does not have any powers at all. But at the end of the third chapter, we do learn what they have on Luke Cage. Their ace in the hole as a way to hopefully bring Luke Cage down once and for all. We kind of find out that Luke and Josephine, they had a son. To close on the third chapter, we pick up Randall Bantikoff now being grabbed. He's being kidnapped by somebody. And that closes the third chapter as we now go into the fourth chapter. But as we get into the fourth and final chapter of the storyline, we do learn that Randall was able to get away. Now, he's still a very important character for today's storyline, but now we jump over to, well, Luke Cage. And you have Luke Cage want to look at the dead body of Daisy once again. Now, earlier, he believed that she was bloating because, well, she must have died earlier than what they were saying. But in reality, no, that was not the case. She was pregnant. And somebody took the unborn child out of her. And so for Luke Cage, it's kind of like, okay, who in the world would kill off Daisy for being pregnant? And really, there's only one person who would do that. That would be her husband, Randall. But you didn't have Luke be confronted by, well, Tombstone. Now, for Tombstone, he tells Luke everything he wants to hear. Not everything, but a good chunk of information. He tells Luke, like, hey, listen, you were supposed to die when I had stepped in when you were beating down on that cop. But unfortunately, you didn't die and you became a hero in this city. But also, you made a mess of our plans. And so I had to clean things up, starting off with Josephine. Now, Josephine was supposed to die apparently because he says, I went to her house and began to torture her. But again, we know that she did not die. That matter of fact, she survived. Now, you have Luke go out of his way to go ahead and kill off Tombstone just like that. So he's out of the picture. And really, it's Luke right now just cleaning house because he then goes after Ratchman, the officer that he beat down 10 years ago. And you have him pretend to be a driver for Ratchman, but in reality, he's not. It's Luke. And so you have Luke drive the vehicle off the bridge into the river. And with Ratchman's broken leg, he won't be able to get out of the water. So basically, he'll drown to death. Now you have Luke go back over to Josephine, and you have Josephine tell Luke everything. Like, yes, Tombstone was supposed to get rid of her, kill her off, but she found out that she was pregnant. And for Tombstone, he is a big mama's boy. And so he's kind of like, no, I cannot kill off somebody who's going to give birth soon to a boy. And so you had Tombstone tell her, go ahead and disappear. But we're going to keep the boy as insurance. So if you ever try to come back and get him or tell anybody about us, we'll kill off your son. And so that's why she was left to believe to be dead, because she's trying her best to protect her son. She tells Luke all of that. And for Luke, he's not done killing off a few people who are trying to burn him. And so you then have Luke go confront Stryker at the barber shop, the same one we saw at the very beginning of this video. Now for Luke, this is really hard to kind of go through because he looked at Stryker as a brother, his best friend, his childhood friend, to only be betrayed by him. Now, why have the two guys having this conversation at the barber shop? You right now have Stryker holding on to Luke's son as a hostage. Now, this section really ends more of Luke and also the barbers there being able to work together to take down Stryker, but to also take out the men that came with Stryker who are trying to kill off Luke Cage and possibly his son as well. But either way, you do have Luke being able to save his son, but now move on to his next target. But now the question is, who killed off Daisy? Now we already know, y'all. We already know it was Randall. It was so obvious. But the question is right now, why? And Luke now knows why. Because Randall is biracial. You see, he's black and white. He's not just Caucasian. See, what happened was in the early days of his life, he was being mistreated. But once he fought in World War I over in France, in Paris, man, he was being treated like a king out there. He was loved by everybody. He was equal to everyone else out there. And so because of that, and because the way he looks, he knew once he gets back, he should be able to start a new life for himself by pretending to just be white, to not be black. And so no one realized that he was mixed. Now, on top of that, he then met Daisy. Daisy had a lot of money. And so once they got money, he now had access to her money and used her money as a way to build up gangs in Harlem. That's how everything came together. But then she announced that she was pregnant, and he was afraid of the idea of the child coming out somewhat dark skinned or some kind of tone where it's obvious the child is part black somewhere. And so he was afraid of being found out. And so that's why he killed off his wife, killed off his unborn child, but also tried to pin everything on Luke Cage. Now, for Luke Cage, his goal was to grab Randall. But here's the thing, you have Randall freak out, pull a gun out, shoot at Luke twice, and then fall out the window and falling to his death. And so it seems like everything is being wrapped up in a nice bow, but technically not. Because again, Randall shot at Luke Cage twice. And so with him being shot by Luke Cage twice, Luke Cage is bleeding out. He has no powers in this reality. And so before he just falls in the river to die, he tells everyone to tell other people what they had saw tonight, to kind of continue on his legacy in Harlem. But you do have Luke Cage officially die and fall into the river. Now, for Josephine and their son, they were able to take the money that Luke had stolen from Stryker and use that money as a way to get away from Harlem, to have a new life somewhere else in the world. And the book does kind of end on that note right there. So, yeah, Luke Cage officially died in this reality at the end of this issue right here. But with that being said, this is where we're going to end today's comic book video. So please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see you on the next comic book video.